Sheila Ryan with Designs by Babymoon, and today I want to talk to you about big fun that you can have with your 4x4 hoops on your embroidery machine. Maybe when you bought your embroidery machine, it only came with a 4x4 hoop and you only intended to do baby items like baby bibs or monogram baby shirts, but there's so much more that you can do with your 4x4 hoop, and today I want to show you some things. Take a look at this. Bookmark. Ornaments are basically felties with a hole in them. Maybe you're interested in making something for your something else for your keys, and you've heard of snap tabs. A snap tab design is basically a felty. You make it the same way, but it has a tab, and on that tab you add snaps that clip around a piece of hardware, whether it's a lobster clasp or a key ring, and snap together, and then this can clip onto your keys. Snap tabs are super fun, but they're basically just felties. Well, you could also get crazy and you could put zippers in the hoop designs, and a zipper bag can be made in your 4x4 hoop with just a specially designed file that has placement stitches for your zipper. And maybe you turn, instead of putting material on the back to cover the stitches, maybe you put material on the front, and then you, at the end of the project, you turn it right side out. Zipper bags are basically glorified felties when you think about it. You can even make zipper bags that not only have a zipper, but it also have pockets. Yes, in your 4x4 hoop. What I'm going to show you today is a super simple 4x4 project that you make completely in the hoop using just a couple of pieces of fabric and stabilizer. There's also a few more other parts, but let me show you what it is. This is a 4x4 project that I call a Fluffy Puff. A Fluffy Puff is basically a stuffed animal design, or a stuffed design made in a 4x4 hoop, just like you would make a stuffy. But a Fluffy Puff has more. A Fluffy Puff has a clip on it and a loop, so that you can use this as a super cute dangle for a backpack or for your purse or even for your keys. I like making my Fluffy Puffs out of super fluffy minky fabric, and my favorite is the Luxe Cuddle from Shannon Fabrics. I use this a lot. It's the highest quality minky on the market, and it really makes my project stand out. So let me show you how to make a Luxe Cuddle in the hoop Fluffy Puff stuffed keychain. It'll be fun. Come on, let's get started. Let's talk about the supplies that you're going to need first. The first thing you're obviously going to need is your 4x4 hoop for your embroidery machine. I've already got mine loaded with tearaway stabilizer, the kind that's very soft and feels like a paper towel. We want something that's going to tear away easily at the end of our project. I've already got my design file loaded. This design is free from Applique Getaway this weekend, and you can find it in your virtual goodie bag and download it and sew along with me if you'd like. I've already run my placement stitches on my stabilizer just to save us a little bit of time, but you can see how simple the placement stitch is on the 4x4 hoop stabilizer. Of course, we're going to need some fabric, and I've got just a scrap of the Luxe Cuddle. I save my scraps for making blankets or larger projects because all we're going to need are 2 pieces that are just about 5 or 6 inches square. That's all we need. It's great. It's a super way to use up your scraps as well. You'll also need a little bit of fold over elastic. Fold over elastic is a stretchy elastic band that's usually used for baby headbands for crafters, or it can be used for what it was intended, which is to fold over the edge of a garment, like on the edge of a nicer t-shirt or the cuffs, or even sometimes on lingerie. This fold over elastic will be used on the edges. We're going to use it to help us hold our hardware together. I like fold over elastic better than ribbon because it feels stronger to me. It's a more durable project that's not going to fray or possibly fall apart like grosgrain or satin ribbon can. There are lots of different places you can get fold over elastic, so check your craft store. You can order it online. The other thing that we're going to need is we're going to need to do a little bit of hand sewing at the end. This is a project that we're going to stitch flat, but then we're going to flip it right side out at the end. So you'll need a needle that's double threaded so that you can hand sew this together at the end. You'll also need a bit of polyfill stuffing, but what I like to do is I like to save my scraps from making other fluffy puffs, and I use those as filling too. Not only does it keep some of the scraps out of the landfill, but it's also a good way to save your fabric and not Okay, so you can stuff your Fluffy Puff heart at the end with some of the scraps from cutting around, trimming off the fabric of the edges at the end. And you can also, after you've used all your scraps, then you can use some polyfill, just fiber fill to stuff it with. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to cut some of this fabric off. Now this fabric kind of sheds a little bit the first time you cut it. If you have a handheld vacuum cleaner, that will help you deal with some of the fibers coming off, or you can just shake it off outside. But let me show you how I cut it to minimize the shedding. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a craft knife. This is an Olfa craft knife. It looks like a box cutter, and I'm just going to cut through the backing of the fabric. This is the wrong side of the fabric. Here's the right side where the fluff is. I'm going to cut through the backing, and I know that I need pieces that are about 5 inches by 5 inches. A little more is fine. I don't want anything smaller than that because I do need a border around it so that this sews correctly in the hoop. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut 2 pieces from the back. This is about 10 and a half inches long this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a strip that's at least 5 inches wide, and I'm just going to slice the backing with my craft knife, and then I won't have so many fibers flying around. So let's do that. Here I go. I'm just going to slice the backing. I give the fabric a little bit of tension while I'm holding it so that I can smooth my knife through easily, and I don't press very hard, but there's my cut edge. There go some of the fibers. And what I do is if there are fibers left on my desk, I'll just save them in a pile, and they go back into the Fluffy Puff at the very end. I stuff those in too, just to get them out of the way. And then I'm going to cut across. Now this fabric has a nap, and so what that means is on the front that it's directional. So just like you would with a print that is directional where all the animals are facing up, this fabric has a direction too. And so I'm just going to feel it with my hand to make sure that it's going to be going the right way. I want my Fluffy Puff to feel good when it's being held. So it will feel good no matter what, but I want it to feel the same on both the front and the back. So I am paying attention to the nap of the fabric. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to lay the first piece over the stitching, and I'm just going to make sure that all of the placement lines are covered. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to stitch a tack down stitch that's going to hold the fabric to the stabilizer. That just gives it a little bit of extra security while we're working in the hoop. So let's go ahead and run that tack down stitch. It just takes a few seconds. Okay, our tack down stitch is done, and you can see that the machine is stitched into a heart that follows the outline of the placement stitch that we put on, but it secures our material down to the hoop. The next thing that the design is going to do, and this is something that happens on all Fluffy Puff designs, maybe your Fluffy Puff has other things. There are lots of Fluffy Puff designs that I've made that have like different things that you can add to the Fluffy Puff, like wings or ears or tails or all kinds of things. This one doesn't have any of that, but all Fluffy Puffs have a little piece of fold over elastic with the hook to place in there. And so there's going to be a little placement line that the design stitches right at the top left corner of the heart area. So we're going to let the machine run that placement stitch, and then we're going to work on top of our fabric just a little bit more. While that's sewing, I'm going to go ahead and cut my fold over elastic. I want to use a piece that's about 3 inches long. Okay. That little placement line is done, and it is kind of hard to see, but it's right there at the top of the heart on the side. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little tiny lobster clasp hook. I'm going to thread it through my fold over elastic. This one has a pretty pattern on it, and I'm going to keep the raw edges together. The raw edges are actually going to go outside the stitching line of our Fluffy Puff, and the hook will hang inside. Now this doesn't look right now, or it doesn't look correct right now, but it is, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be flipping this right side out at the end. So we need the raw edges of the fold over elastic to stick out over that stitching line. To secure it just a little bit, only on the outside of the hoop, I'm going to give it a little bit of tape. This is embroidery safe tape, and I'm going to tape it down well out of the way of the stitching area. I don't want to be picking tape out of my stitching at all, but the stitching will hold down, it'll tack down this fold over elastic so that it is secure in the hoop as well. Let's go ahead and run that tack down for the fold over elastic and see how it looks after that. And while I was messing it, I pulled mine out of that area. I pulled my lobster clasp completely off. Let's put that back on. So I've looped my hardware around. I've got it secured to the tape so that I can't pull it off. And I'm going to tape that down onto my hoop. I do want to make sure that this clasp is well out of the way of the stitching line too, because we don't want our needle hitting that metal at all. If you need to, you could add another piece of tape just to secure that metal piece of hardware completely out of the way of where the stitching will be, and it'll also help get it out of the way of the presser foot. If you needed to, on your embroidery machine, you could raise your presser foot just a little bit. on mine has a setting where I can raise it per millimeter, and so I just have raised mine a little bit because I do into hoop projects a lot and I don't want my foot getting caught on anything. So I keep mine at about 4 millimeters. Okay, this is so great. So we're actually almost done. Our hardware loop has gotten tacked down. I'm going to leave this piece of tape that's holding my hardware down on this so that as we're doing the final outline, that's not going to move around, but I am going to remove the piece of tape that was covering the raw edges. So I only have the one piece of tape, keeping the hardware inside the stitching lines of the design. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to check the nap of my fabric, figure out which way is going from top to bottom, and I'm going to cover the stitches that we've did on here. So essentially, just like we covered the placement stitches, now we're going to cover that tack down stitch so that our design, all of the stitches that we've done so far, are completely covered by the second layer. And this is essentially going to make us a little stuffy with an opening so that we can turn it right side out in just a minute. So if you need to, you could use a little bit of tape to hold your top layer down, and I'm going to tape just the corners of this down, well out of the stitching area. Like I said, I do not like picking tape out of stitching. I find that to be a little bit tedious, and sometimes it can cause my stitches to pop if I'm not careful. So I tape well outside of the area that I'm stitching. Okay, we're ready to stitch the final outline. That's it. The embroidery machine is done with its part. Now it's time for us to do a little bit of work on it. Here's our heart outline. This is what the back looks like. Let's take it out of the hoop. So I am removing the hoop, and I'm taking off all of the tape that was on there before. I'll set my hoop aside and that tape and throw it away later. And then I'm going to take off all of that stabilizer. So the reason I like using the soft stabilizer for these projects is because it also doesn't stress the stitching as I remove it. Other stabilizers might be a little bit harder. The stiffer, more crunchy ones, the soft kind, works really well for in the hoop projects that you need to remove the stabilizer for. We can set this in the trash because we don't need that at all. And now what we have is our stuffed animal. Now what we need to do is we need to remove the fabric around the outside. What I'm going to do is I'm basically going to trim a heart shape just a little bit larger. I like to leave it between 3/8 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch. So I try to cut right at about a 1/2 inch around it. But we also, since we're going to be turning this right side out and we do have curves, I like to give a little notch up to the stitching line, but not through it, in these 3 places. In the tutorial that comes with this design, you'll see that I've showed you, I can show you exactly where to cut a line at, but I'll show you right here as well. You could notch the curve so that it gives a little bit more You can notch the curve if you'd like, and that will allow the fabric to give a little bit more. But since it's a knit fabric, I don't find that I need to notch the curves as much, but I do like to notch into the corners. So what I'm going to use is my craft knife again, and I'm going to simply cut. I'm going to cut on one side at a time, and I'm not using a lot of pressure with my craft knives. I'm just trying to slice through the backing material, not through all of the layers at once. So let's just roughly cut that out. And if you find that your knife is dragging a little bit, that generally means that it's time for a new blade. I like these Olfa knives because the blades do tend to last a long time, but they're also very easy to replace. Okay, I'm just removing most of that. And this does not have to be perfect. Like I said, we're going to be flipping this right side out, so you do not have to be very precise. You can, but I find that this project is actually very forgiving, and so if you make a little bit of a mistake at this point in the trimming, it does not have to be perfect at all, so it's very nice. Okay, I do want to cut off any of the fold over elastic that's sticking out just because it's in the way and kind of bulky, but here's what I have now. Oops, let's get that little bit off. You can see that that is kindergarten quality cutting right there. You could use scissors, but when you use scissors or a rotary cutter, you're going to get more of the dust from the minky flying around. So that's why I choose to use the knife. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip into these corners right here just to give the fabric a little bit of, to take some of the stress off from turning it right side out. So I'm going to use my craft knife, and on either side I will cut in up to the seam, but I will not go into the seam. I will not cut to the stitches at all. But I do want to give that so it takes a little bit of stress off of the material as it turns right side out. And that'll give me a nicer shape at the end as well. If you wanted to, you could slice across the bottom here, but I don't want to take off too much because I do want the fabric to do its job. So I don't want to get too far away from that edge. So I took about 1/4 of an inch, left about 1/4 of an inch away from that seam. See the little notches I made up closer to those corners, but I did not cut through the seam line. This little opening right here will help at the end when we're stitching it all together, and that will give us a good guideline. So that's why I left those opening there. Okay, now I'm going to reach inside my Fluffy Puff and I'm going to feel for the hook. If you can feel the tape, if you will just work that out. There's that tape over there. Here comes my hook. And here comes my Fluffy Puff. I'm going to work it out with my thumb and kind of press out the corners and the bumps of the heart. Being careful not to push too hard. We don't want to stress the fabric so much that the stitches pop, but if you've left a good edge, you should be fine. And there's our Fluffy Puff. Now, what is kind of cool is that you can bump out the edges with your fingers, but there's no need to do anything else at this point. This little flap is our opening, and what I like to do is I just like to tuck it in just to kind of see where I'm going to be closing it up. And I do have a perfect heart shape. Isn't that cute? I'm going to take the fibers that I saved from trimming all around and from some that came off, and I'm just going to stuff them inside my heart. That way none of this goes to the landfill, nor does it go onto the floor of my sewing studio. And then I'm going to top it off with a little bit of polyfill. You can stuff these as firmly or as lightly as you'd like. It doesn't take a whole lot. And you could use scraps from other projects as well to stuff this with. Scraps of felt, scraps of cotton fabrics, scraps of knit fabrics, or scraps of your minky fabrics from making other projects. All right, I've got this stuffed quite nicely the way I like it. I like the way it feels. I like the stuffiness of it. I'm going to double check now. When we did a tack down stitch, that stitching left a kind of a stitching line that I can see on the front fabric. So this is how it was in the hoop. We made that tack down stitch. I'm going to use the stitching line as a guideline for sewing the opening closed. I've already threaded a needle with a double thread and made a knot at one end. But what I'm going to do is show you how I keep this knot from popping through the fabric. So when you're stitching these closed, what I like to do is go right up underneath one of those stitches from the outline with my needle up from the inside. But before I pull this all the way through, I like to go through the loop that's made by the knot. And now my thread is secured to the to that top layer, and it's not going to pop through. The knot will not pop through the knitted fabric. And now I'm just going to quickly close up that hole. Following the line at the top, I folded it in so that the bottom and the top match their shape. And then I'm just going to quickly stitch it. You can use a ladder stitch or you can use a whip stitch. What I found is that this fabric is very forgiving and it hides the stitches, so don't feel like you need to be a perfectionist about closing up your seams at this point. It's really very, very simple to get these closed. It doesn't take long at all. If you're making a bunch at a time, you could simply stitch them all out and then have a session where you were hand sewing all the openings closed and do it assembly line style. I do like to move the fibers out of the way as I'm stitching this so that I can see the backing fabric through the fibers, and that way I'm sure that I'm going to be able to get it closed securely. I just give it a little pull to keep making sure that it's closed, and in just a few stitches we're done and there's no opening left. I'll take and make a double loop or a loop with the threads. I'll grab that with this finger and then I'll go through twice with my needle and then pull it tight. And there's my knot. And trim that off. Okay, our Fluffy Puff is done. Isn't that cute? There's one more thing I like to do for these. I like to use a stiletto tool with my Minky projects, and sometimes the fibers are so long that they get caught in the seams, but I just rub my stiletto tool along those seams, and suddenly it doesn't even look like it has seams. It looks like it's one piece, completely fluffy all the way through. That's it. Your Fluffy Puff is done. You made that in your 4x4 hoop. Who says 4x4 hoops aren't fun? You can make lots of designs like this, little tiny stuffies with and without the keychain. There are tons of stuffy designs on the Designs by Babymoon website. A lot of people like to use these for little stocking stuffer gifts for their kids and grandkids. I have seen people take and stuff them with catnip for cat toys, or even toys for their small exotic animals like ferrets and chinchillas. So there's so much that you can do with designs like this. These make great sellers if you do craft shows. They're excellent little sellers that have a really nice impact. You could make them for holidays. There's all kinds of themed stuffies like this that you can use in your craft show booths or at holiday events. These make great party favors as well. There's so many ways that you can use them. I love making Fluffy Puffs. I love making 4x4 designs, and I can't get enough of them. I have big hoops, and I love projects with big hoops. But there's something that's so cute and so fun about making something so tiny on your embroidery machine. I can't get enough of it. I hope that you found this project fun and that you've enjoyed it and that you can make your own Fluffy Puffs. Be sure to stop by the Designs by Babymoon website. For Applique Getaway, there's a special code that you can find in your goodie bag for 50% all designs for the weekend of Applique Getaway and the following week. So be sure to look at that. Find your free design in your goodie bag as well. And thank you for stitching along with us. I hope that you get to make some 4x4 projects and that you have lots of fun with them. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy your time at Applique Getaway. We'll see you soon.